Welcome back to BLOCKTV. I'm Ron Friedman, and it's time for Cryptonomics. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission issued a bombshell lawsuit on Friday, obtaining a temporary restraining order against Telegram and the TON network, seeking, quote, certain emergency relief, as well as permanent injunctions, disgorgement with prejudgment interest, and civil penalties against the platform for what the SEC is now calling an unlawful $1.7 billion ICO in 2018. For more details on the case and some insights from Telegram sources, I am joined in studio by BLOCKTV senior correspondent Asher Westrop-Evans. Asher, huge case, yes?
Yes, certainly a huge case, and perhaps a good signal that just when you take a little too long with your ICO and they no longer are in fashion, then the SEC will catch up with you. Sometimes speed pays off.
No doubt. But put this lawsuit in context and give us some more of the details.
Okay, so an important thing to note here, the SEC has ruled filing this temporary injunction to halt the moving ahead of the Telegram Open Network in the United States. But a few things to note, obviously, that is in the United States. Right. So potentially that sort of limits the greater damage to Telegram and to the Telegram Open Network, except for the fact that according to the lawsuit itself, approximately $425 million worth of grams were sold to those initial investors that are based inside the United States.
Right. So they're off the table for now.
Well, it depends, and we'll get into this in a moment, but what they do moving forward is going to be interesting. But just so we know where it stands, so that's at risk and jeopardy here. What's going to happen in other jurisdictions as well? Obviously, when the SEC rules, there's a potential roll-on for effects of precedent followed in other jurisdictions. The SEC has often been seen as a guiding institution for a lot of other financial institutions around the world. Now, we haven't had responses yet from other major countries, but I'm sure European legislators will be looking into this as closely as well, not to mention others around the world. Russia itself, the home country of Telegram, has already had potential issues with Telegram, and so far they've just been trying to sort of skirt under the radar here, but with the deadline for launch fast approaching, October 31st being the contractual deadline, which is set to launch. And
explain to us what that contract means, that has to launch by October 31st, or else?
Or else they are obliged to repay investors and to go back to investors and give them their money back. It's sort of the sunset clause, as it were, put into this contract.
And just to remind you, we're talking about 2018, two rounds of private
exactly,
ICO.
two rounds of private investment launches. One selling at 37 cents and the other at $1.33 to about 175 odd initial investors, or large scale high net wealth individuals or institutional investors that were getting in early on, again amounting to $1.7 billion. Now,
biggest ICO by far.
Exactly. Now we're really at risk of seeing what's going to happen once this launch takes off. If they try and go ahead in the United States, there's going to be some serious problems, and also it may affect just generally the market and desire, which has been already booming. I mean, we've seen massive amounts of sales of effectively gram futures, as it were, because the product doesn't yet exist, being sold on a number of different secondary markets and exchanges. So how that will impact on those that have already committed to buying grams, those who had committed to sell but might be based in the United States. Ron, there could be some very serious roll-on effects.
So we'll talk a bit about what, just the fact that the SEC took this action now in a bit, but Telegram already issued kind of a response, at least in a letter to investors.
Exactly.
Right?
So Telegram has come out with a response in a formal letter to investors, and I'll read a little bit from that, where they state, Telegram has attempted to engage with and solicit feedback from the SEC for the past 18 months regarding the TON blockchain. We're surprised and disappointed that the SEC chose to file the lawsuit under these circumstances, and we disagree with the SEC's legal position. Together with our advisors, we're continuing to evaluate the best means by which to resolve the situation in interests of the relevant parties, including but not limited to assessing whether to seek to delay the launch date. We are working diligently and promptly to address these issues and expect to provide further updates over the next week. Ron, that's some big stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, saying that they're potentially going to delay the launch, claiming, most importantly, that they have been attempting to work with the SEC.
Right, that kind of flies against what we've heard so far, what the SEC has been saying. But we've been reporting on it all along, that yes, this project is flying under the radar. Regulators, either they didn't have access to any information on it, or they weren't taking any interest
It's
in
been
it.
a notoriously secretive project, Ron. I mean, up until probably the last week when the terms and conditions were formally released, there was very little in the way of formal announcement from Telegram in any way, shape or form this project actually existed.
Right.
Everything we were getting from a reporting sense was coming from those investors who were giving out information, leaking things, sort of discussing it amongst themselves. None of those figures have been initially reported, formally reported by Telegram itself. And so it is a question whether they're working with regulators or not.
Right.
But as the SEC pointed out, as officials from the SEC pointed out, regardless, to go ahead with a securities sale, an unregulated securities sale, you can't just call it a cryptocurrency and get away with it according to their analysis. They're saying these are securities under US law and current guidance, and just to call it a cryptocurrency doesn't mean you can get away with selling hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars worth of securities because you want to.
And for the SEC, it seems to be an open shut case. This on the face of it violates the Howey test, and therefore it's a security.
According to all current SEC guidelines, this would be inappropriate. It's unsurprising, I guess, that the SEC did make this ruling. I guess the timing, though, I think Telegram was hoping to get away with it sort of under the radar, as we've said. But now this has happened, all right? This is where they're facing right now, so Telegram has to decide how they're going to move forward.
And we heard the official statement to investors,
But sources inside Telegram who have spoken to BLOCKTV have told us that they have three possible avenues for how they want to move forward. One, to fight it out in court. Take the sort of the kin-kick approach, take it to the courts, fight it out, and see if they can get past this temporary injunction. Number two, simply ignore the issue and leave US investors to decide how they want to cope and want to move forward.
Continue with the plan. 31st of October, or before the 31st of October launch, and let the chips fall where they may.
Exactly. Let it all stand out where it has to. Or number three, this could be an expensive one, refund US investors. It would be probably a better look for the company as a whole, seen to being honoring investors and having respect in that sense. But that's $425 million, Ron. It's not small change. And while they did certainly raise a lot of money, who knows how much of that capital they've spent. Telegram, it's a pretty sizable company. You imagine they would have the reserves to at least in some way recover this. But it wouldn't be a good look, and it would also take a serious hit to the liquidity of Grams themselves as they expect to launch with many new investors wanting to come in, with those initial investors wanting to recoup their principal. They've been sitting on this money for almost 2 years now, most of these the early investors. So they're ready to get that money back and start to see some returns.
They were anticipating price boosts at the beginning of trade, and now with maybe a third of those tokens off the table, it could be interesting to see what it does to the price.
It certainly is, but there's more we've got sort of from our sources over at Telegram saying that. So firstly, as they stated in the letter somewhat, the company was blindsided by this decision. So they really weren't expecting it. They weren't expecting the SEC to come out, which they did seemingly come out very suddenly. At least there was no sort of formal pre-warning coming out. But there's also, to get a little conspiratorial, a suggestion coming.
Some of that.
Of course, so a suggestion coming from sources that perhaps Libra might have something to do with this, that Libra being concerned about potential competitors. I mean, whether Telegram is truly a competitor to Libra or not, sort of up in the air, but regardless, it's seen as a competitor in the sort of mainstream opinion, and that Libra might have come out and said, hey, we're trying to do this by being on board with regulators.
Look at these guys.
Look at these guys for a moment. You can't let this happen under the wings and risk sort of sweeping the legs out from under the already beleaguered Libra project, but maybe at the time they started this, pushing for this action. So, could this be the sort of speculated, sort of US, Russian, there's some national interest agendas being put here. But a lot of people are concerned about Libra taking on the role as the global currency. But now Libra might be saying, well, hold on, let's watch out for this Telegram thing that's happening here. It's fascinating, Ron, that US regulators have ignored this for so long.
Absolutely, and then come out like this.
At the 11th hour, they've come out, just a few weeks before they were dead set to launch, and they're saying, you know what, we can't go ahead with this. It's a big blow, and it's going to be very interesting to see how the market copes with this and what happens moving ahead, whether this all turns to infighting, whether US investors are going to be left high and dry. I mean, it's a lot of money on the table, Ron, and it could have a real impact on the market.
No doubt. And just a last word, we mentioned Libra. This is a big week for them as well. We have we know that altogether 5 of the original association partners have said they're backing out of the association. What's next?
So we've had all these members back out. Now we're headed into the big meetup, the association meetup in Switzerland, set to take place on the 14th. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Does that lead to another flood of that initial 28 pulling out of the association?
Right.
Does it is Facebook able to consolidate and get those remaining to stay?
Well, we do know that some of those that didn't back out have recommitted and said they're on board.
They have. Although that being said, we saw those recommitments from from Virgin and Vodafone and whatnot coming out, but will they continue to feel that? Now we've had more pullouts. I mean, it just becomes shaky ground. We've had all the payment processing companies pull out so far. That loses a lot of the credibility and legitimacy that Facebook had sought to achieve for the Libra Association to begin with. It's a new ball game, it's a new playing field, and it's going to be very interesting to see if the Libra Association is able to hold it all together.
So marking calendars, October 14th is one, October 23rd, I believe, is the next one. That's when Mark Zuckerberg is going to be testifying before the Committee on the Hill. Definitely always interesting developments when these two worlds of social media giants and cryptocurrency or digital assets meet. Obviously exciting. Asher, thanks very much for breaking that down with us. Those of you at home, don't go anywhere. We're going to be right back with more blockchain and cryptocurrency news.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.